Under your governorship, wind and solar energy began to expand dramatically in Texas. And Texas is deploying now solar energy faster than any other state, even ahead of California. Texas produces nearly 30% of the nation's wind energy. Natural gas has come down dramatically in price and remains very low. So at this critical juncture, why pursue nuclear energy when we have an abundance of the other relatively inexpensive options?
So having an all-of-the-above energy policy is, what we've kind of been all about. When you think about, backtrack all the way to 22, 23 years ago, natural gas was, $14 an MCF, thereabouts, and we were looking for some alternatives. The wind thing was looking pretty good, so I made the statement, Ernie, in probably 03 or 04, that, man, if we could just get to 15% of our portfolio of renewables, we would be cutting the fat hog, so to speak. And I'll explain that to you later, Isabelle. But the point is, we were looking for some alternatives. Wind was an appropriate one. We passed the legislation to get the CREZ lines built. That was our subsidy, the state subsidy. We'll build the power lines to get it down here. And we did. We were successful. Well, fast forward, and one of the things that literally changed the world was our friend George Mitchell, who didn't give up on his concept of hydraulic fracturing, and he literally changed the world, Rick. And then gas obviously went down to a very reasonable amount. The federal government decided to start giving a lot of incentives for the renewable side of things, and we've seen that renewable growth. I will suggest to you that's been the big driver on the renewable side of things, is the federal subsidies on that, and we can have that conversation, that debate about whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. But the state of Texas now, the natural gas capital of the world, if not one of the top ones, I think, VA, what are we now? Are we in our dispatchable energy portfolio today? We're around 50% of our dispatchable energy is from renewables. Now, I will suggest to you, I'm a fan of renewables, but when you are relying on your dispatchable energy to be 50% renewable, you might be setting yourself up for some problems. Hence is the reason I am for the expansion of these small modular reactors. I think they are the future. I think they're going to be obviously economically feasible, walk away safe, and just like George Mitchell's innovation, the innovation that SMRs, pushing them into our universities, public-private partnerships, all of that collectively, when you think about what SMRs can do, will do, I will suggest to you, and the added benefit of having zero emissions from that, then my question is, why wouldn't we have that additional energy source and continue with a really good, robust, all of the above energy policy?
Secretary Moniz, same question to you.
Well, much of my response certainly will track with what Rick just said. I would add a little specificity, perhaps, on the renewable side. For example, Texas, clearly, and Rick, under your stewardship, this was an important direction. For example, Texas, by far, has the largest deployed wind in the United States. And certainly, especially when renewables, variable renewables, are relatively small in the overall mix, and I'm not going to define relatively small, can be very inexpensive. One can add, obviously, storage with batteries, et cetera. But, you have to, it's useful to look at data. So we looked at Texas, for example, dispatch hour by hour, 1 year, just before COVID. A typical year, it was nothing exceptional, I don't believe. And what we found was that when the wind is blowing in Texas, boy, it's a great resource. Yep. But there were 90 days that year where there was very little wind in Texas, and that included 9 days in a row. You're not going to do 9 days in a row with batteries, and this is all the same lesson that we just heard. We need to have a system that is integrated to make sense. It's got to have a very significant amount of firm power. That's where nuclear comes in. The reality is we don't have a lot of low to no emissions firm power options. Nuclear is the lead horse in that. Then we have renewables, weather dependent, but a great resource. And frankly, I think that that whole system is still going to need to be complemented by some, at least, backup gas generation for those times when you're going to, when the weather is not cooperating, you're going to need it. It may get to lower and lower capacity factor, but you're going to need the capacity. How that works in the Texas market, we'll have to discuss the capacity requirements. But that's what makes a whole system. And the stakes are very high because, as we know, in the country as a whole and in Texas specifically, electricity load growth is huge. And we have an imperative to meet that load for all kinds of reasons, economic, environmental, security, international competitiveness, and the like. So we got to get this right. And we got to get this right looking at various timescales, like with this load growth in the near term. Bluntly, there is not much of a solution other than more gas. But when you look 5, 10, 15 years down the road, it's shame on us if we haven't prepared low emissions, firm power options like nuclear.
Yep, absolutely. And let me just add, Ernie, I think America's always been where the world looked for innovation. And if we're serious about the climate in a global sense, then American innovation that, frankly, I think can start right here in the state of Texas. My beloved Texas A&M has just done some things to be able to send the message that we're going to get really serious about small modular reactors out at the Rellis campus and doing some work there. Our friends right down the street here at the University of Texas, they're going to be involved with that. I know Doug Robinson's in here and Abilene Christian and what they're doing at ACU. So I mean, we have the core to really build this out with our private sector partners, our universities, the state. I don't know if Dennis Bonner is in here today. Cody Harris is probably in here. There's a number of the members of the legislature that have this nuclear caucus that they're putting together. So the public-private partnership focus on these small modular reactors, and that innovation will go all over the world. If you're serious about helping India reduce the emissions in that country, it'll be American, most likely, innovation that comes forward in SMRs to be able to move offline those old, inefficient power plants, and frankly, those coal plants that are being built on a pretty regular basis in China. And hopefully, leadership around the world will coalesce together. They'll look at these new technologies, they'll implement them, and we can address this issue of the climate in a thoughtful way that actually works.
Rick, I'm from MIT, the Texas A&M of the Northeast.
Yes, sir.
Right.
I get it. And a real physicist, I'm just an animal science major. So Ernie reminds me on a fairly regular basis, he actually could pass organic chemistry.
I think just to build on a point that Secretary Moniz made earlier, there are more and people coming to the realization that we do need nuclear, right, for all the reasons that you both mentioned. But the reality is that cost is still a big problem. You know, the United States had a period of about 30 years where we didn't build any nuclear reactors, and the last two ones at Vogel in Georgia, you know, exactly, extreme cost overruns. And so how do we prevent that from happening, especially in a state like Texas that has this very unique electricity market? How do we prevent this cost overruns from happening, and how do we make nuclear attractive to people in the state of Texas?
Well, I think, again, the technology that we're seeing now, the small modular reactor models that are out there, and I think to incentivize them, I'm always intrigued with people that don't understand the simplicity of governing. If you won't overtax, overregulate, overlitigate, and you have a skilled workforce, which generally means, you know, accountable public schools, those are the four things that you need to do for your economy to grow. So having these, having these technologies that you incentivize, you get more of what you incentivize. I mean, one of the reasons that we have all of the wind and solar today is because they've been incentivized. So my instinct is, and I'm suggesting to the members of the legislature that are out here today, that incentivizing small modular reactors in the state of Texas, and you will have more of those. And that type of say the word for me, incentivization, will work. Last session of the legislature, what do? We incentivized peaker plants so that we wouldn't run into this problem that we ran into with Winter Storm Uri. We could flip a switch, get those up, get us going. But the incentives that you will see in SMRs, I think, is what's going to really drive the process forward.
Can I just add, I think obviously technology, innovation, et cetera, and incentives are important, but I think there's more to it than that, to be honest. Frankly, I see little opportunity to really drive down the cost curve without getting a substantial amount of demand aggregation. We need to build, frankly, a lot of plants of a relatively small number of technologies because that's the way you do learning, and learning works. For example, Vogel in Georgia was referred to. I will, truth in advertising, I was until recently, until May, I was on the board of Southern Company, so I had a pretty close look at what was happening with Vogel. First of all, it's hard to keep the scale of workforce, trained workforce that one needs for the kind of expansion that we want. Secondly, as I said, learning really works. When we went from Vogel 3 to Vogel 4, those are the two new reactors, the commissioning, all the commissioning steps, which are very critical, took 40 to 50% the second time, Vogel 4, compared to the first time. If you look at the 4 reactors built in the United Arab Emirates, the learning curve was again about a factor of 2 in going over the course of that construction. So we need, and Texas is certainly talking, I think, the right game about a substantial deployment that can lead to supply chain investments, workforce training, all the things you need to work down from first of a kind to nth of a kind. We need risk sharing. Everybody would rather be the third builder rather than the first builder of, especially of a new technology. We need to find a way of risk sharing within the private sector and between the private and public sectors. That's where the incentives come in, for example. Now, there may be SMR additional opportunities from the point of view of enhanced manufacturability, and the manufacturing environment we know is another cost reduction opportunity. But I do want to say, look, I am a bit more flexible, if you like. I think we need to look at gigawatt scale reactors. We need to look at SMRs, and microreactors are certainly going to have their place. So I think we shouldn't just stovepipe ourselves too early. In my view, it's what do the utilities want? What do the users want in terms of making commitments to gigawatts of construction so that, again, risk can be understood, managed, so that we have the benefits of learning. We have an initiative called the Nuclear Scaling Initiative that wants to advance all of this, and I might say Isabelle has been a great supporter of this initiative. All of these factors come in, and it adds up to saying, and Armin Cohen is here somewhere, Clean Air Task Force, that we need to move the nuclear construction business from a project mentality to a product mentality. That's when we get the big cost reduction that we need.
So, I want you to expound on that just a little bit, the difference between the two different models that you just talked about there right at the end of your statement about the production model versus the...
Well, in a product model, and again, the example that Armin always likes to use would be an aircraft manufacturer. They know they're going to sell hundreds of units. They amortize costs across that number of units. When you come to nuclear power, let's say the Vogtle situation, it's quite typical. Okay, we're going to build 2 reactors, in that case AP 1000, 1100 megawatt reactors or whatever, and that's it. You assemble a workforce going on 10,000 people. You find 2,000 electricians to spend 6 years in rural Georgia, and then they go off to work at a shipyard or some other kinds of projects. We lose the learning capability. That's the project mentality. You know, I'm going to build this project, and guess what? It tends to cost more than you think. Whereas this product mentality is got much more the focus on what is that nth of a kind cost.
And I think that's important. The reason I wanted the Secretary to expound on that is because this assembly line way of building small modular reactors and the number of jobs, long-term jobs that can come to the state of Texas. I mean, that's one of the reasons, Rick, we're also interested in this, is because not only is this, you know, addressing our energy needs that we need so that we can put out our, you know, open for business sign to the AI world and the data centers that are going to come with that, but it's the building of these small modular reactors, literally the factories and the assembly line that's going to get built. And so having that understanding about the really large economic impact that this can have on the state, when we get focused on it, we get committed to it, we put the incentives in place, and people will come here or we will organically grow right here in the state. All of these plants and all the jobs that are going to get created. So, I mean, for me, that's the real driver. I've been an economic development guy from the get-go, and I see SMRs as not just an answer to our energy needs and to the climate and all the positive things that come from it, but the jobs that can get created and the long-term good jobs. And Ernie talked about, you know, creating the educational requirements to fill all of those jobs, and our trades, and having our, really expanding the trades, whether it's the welders, the electricians, the HVACs, and all of that. I mean, I just think all of this together can be a massive economic driver for the state of Texas.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to go back to incentives a minute ago. You mentioned, Governor Perry, that a large reason why there's so much wind in the state of Texas were the federal incentives. We've seen through the IRA a host of incentives that could potentially benefit nuclear. With President Trump's election, there's some consternation about what the IRA's fate will be, particularly with respect, at least with this group, with respect to the tax credits that will benefit nuclear. I guess two-part question. Should the federal government play a role in stimulating and incentivizing new nuclear? And if so, what advice would you offer those who are taking a new look at the IRA, whether they should take a new look at the IRA?
Yeah, I'm a fan of government giving some instruction to the country, in my case, the state. When I was the governor, I was a fan of incentivizing particular actions to get a desired effect. And whether it was the enterprise fund, I mean, we had a number of incentive programs. So I'm not one of these, oh, that's not government's role. I'm a supporter of that. Now, I'm going to let, I'm going to let the folks in Washington, D.C. decide, how you tweak or you change or what have you. That's the way our democracy works. There's parts of the IRA that I could probably stand up and say, I like that particular part of it. I think that was a good incentive. There's other parts of it that I would suggest to you, a total waste of money. It's a duplication. There are parts of it. They'll sort that out. But I think the point is, I do think it is government's role to be a partner. And if you can really make government be a partner rather than just being a piggy bank and pushing money out the doors, then you'll have a better outcome. We found, and my friends on the right, a lot of times, they stand up and say, it's not government's role to be involved in the marketplace. Well, that's a beautiful, perfect world that you live in. State of Texas, don't be involved in giving an incentive for a company to come here to build X numbers of thousands of jobs. And we don't live in that perfect world, because some other state is going to come in and they're going to say, here is X numbers of dollars for you to come to North Carolina to build that plant. And guess what? That's where they're going to go. So finding the balance is always the challenge, but I do think that government has a role, should play a role, and hopefully we will hire really smart, capable individuals at our government levels that know how to make that work. It's
heartwarming to hear the bipartisanship on industrial policy. But the reality is, and for lots of reasons, domestic but also international geopolitical pressures, we don't have to name the country explicitly, we have entered an era of greater bipartisan industrial policy. Just don't call it that. So the euphemism is industrial strategy. But it's a reality, and as Rick says, choices have to be made, and they are made. Now, with regard to the IRA, we've heard, obviously, well, there was a group of 18 members of Congress who wrote something on the IRA. Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon, just said in Baku, don't upset the apple cart needlessly in terms of IRA. Personally, I think that, and this is where we would agree, I think that one way or another, there are going to be selective elements of the IRA retained, whether or not it is actually in the IRA. That is, the IRA could be repealed, but if it is, I would still argue some parts of it are going to go back in some other way in the tax code, et cetera. And I think among those that are more on the favored side would be the nuclear credits. There will be others. I think some of the hydrogen credits will be favored. For example, the EV credits will be disfavored. I think there's a little question about that, et cetera. But I think on the nuclear side, there remains a strong bipartisan support. I remind you, back in June, the Advance Act was passed in the Congress by overwhelming majorities in both chambers, bipartisan majorities in both chambers. However, that's great, but I don't think they've yet understood or have had the courage, perhaps, I don't know, to go far enough down the line in what I was talking about earlier, like encouraging order books, real public-private risk sharing that can free up private capital to come in. So I'd say there's probably some good news, but it's not that great news yet until we take these next steps.
So I want to shift topics a little bit because Secretary Moniz, when you were Secretary of Energy, you made the Iran deal. So you're very well aware of the potentials for nuclear energy to lead to the expansion of nuclear weapons. So as we're talking at this moment about expanding nuclear energy, not just in the US, but globally, what are some of the things that we should keep in mind to prevent that spread of weapons?
Yeah, thanks, Isabelle. I think that's a very important question, and it is part of our nuclear scaling initiative. That is, if the Dubai COP28 aspiration of tripling nuclear power globally is to be met, that means a lot of building in countries that currently have nuclear power. It means a number of new countries, so-called embarking countries, coming in. It's very important that from the beginning, in addition to the obvious factors, that security, non-proliferation, et cetera, be built into that system. There are many ways of addressing that. As an example, well, first of all, maybe to be slightly didactic, of course, in terms of the risks are posed because the same technologies that are used in the nuclear energy fuel cycle can be used in terms of developing a nuclear weapons potential. And that involves fundamentally two things: enrichment to make high enriched uranium potentially, and reprocessing in principle to separate plutonium, the two elements that are used in nuclear weapons. So that's the risk part of it. So what do you do to address it is the question. Again, I'll just mention one factor. For example, we need to really reevaluate what has been the long-standing agreement among countries as to what the International Atomic Energy Agency can do. There are standard so-called safeguards agreements. They are very, very limited. For example, under a standard safeguards agreement, the IAEA inspectors cannot go anywhere in a country other than the places the country says they can go. Well, duh, let me think about that. So, for example, then there's something called the additional protocol, which countries can voluntarily agree to, that would allow the IAEA to say, you know, something doesn't look right over there, even though you haven't declared it, or maybe because you haven't declared it, and we need to go and see that. Well, maybe we got to get to a place where, not easy, where that's a requirement, additional protocol. Maybe we got to, I'm just going to drill into this one example. Maybe we got to go further, because the additional protocol, great next step, go look at suspect places. Well, okay, I've agreed, I've signed the protocol, I will give you access to that place. Come back in 2 years, we'll be ready. Well, maybe we need a fixed time frame that's more rational, et cetera. So there's all kinds of questions to be explored. There are some fundamental technology questions in terms of access to these nuclear weapons materials, et cetera. There's a lot we can do, but I'll be honest. In the United States, I think we have a broken system. We had a great success with the United Arab Emirates in terms of their signing up to a very strict agreement in terms of enrichment and reprocessing, et cetera. The 123 agreement and the so-called gold standard of the 123 agreement. So now we say, oh, well, we succeeded once, let's just stick to that. Well, most countries aren't going to do that. There are other ways to skin the cat. Is that a Texas expression?
Everybody in here knew what you meant by that.
Kind of animal science, you know. We've got to be more flexible. Now, don't get me wrong. The United Arab Emirates, in having agreed to that gold standard, they have said publicly it's been to their benefit. The reason being, those strong commitments took away all the underbrush in terms of international cooperation with them. Nobody was suspecting them of misusing it. So it helped them. So I'm not saying we don't keep that on the table, but we have to be more flexible and understand what our objectives are and not what the process is.
Yeah. Ernie, let me ask you to expound a little bit, because the challenges that we have with the fuels that we're using historically and the weapons grade of those fuels. Do you think that small modular reactors with the non-weapons grade fuels that many of these reactors are going to be using, that's the reason that we'll see a proliferation of SMRs and the energy that's developed by them in the future?
Well, first of all, the only SMRs that use nuclear weapons grade fuels tend to be on submarines and aircraft carriers, not in the commercial energy space. And so all of the commercial reactors will use preferably traditional enriched uranium, which means enrichment in U-235 to 4 to 5%. Some will use what's called high assay LEU up to 20%. By definition, and it is by definition, it's not a technical hard line, 20% has been declared okay for commercial use, and above 20% not okay. Just for those who don't know, weapons grade enriched uranium is typically around 90% enriched. However, almost all the work you need to do to get to 90%, you've already done, certainly by 20%, because you're down now to a much smaller amount of material to enrich. So, but that's where you need the safeguards, the expanded safeguards that countries will be using this LEU or high assay LEU, and it doesn't change the fact, basically, that we need to have strong verification and transparency measures to know that we're not heading up to this weapons material. Just by the way, as an aside, those of you who follow the news, so Iran, since the end of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, they have recently enriched up to 60%, and frankly, there is no rational use of 60% enriched uranium. So if we ever get back to an agreement with them, and there is some interesting poking around going on, that will have to go. Yeah.
But as we talked about, as you said, there are two issues. There's the enrichment issue, and then there is the waste issue as well. And I think that a lot of people, oppose nuclear energy still based on the waste. And in Texas, the government is fighting a proposed interim storage facility that was allowed. So I think, Secretary Perry, how do you think it's possible to move ahead with nuclear energy in Texas if we still don't have a solution for the waste?
Yeah. It's one of the places that Governor Abbott and I disagreed on that issue. I was working towards having that waste disposed. I think there's some really safe, long-term ways to do it. And what I'd like to do is not deflect from the answer, but Ernie and I were talking about this earlier, about his view of how you deal with the long-term storage of nuclear waste. Would you just share with the crowd your ideas?
They were asking the questions.
Huh?
I thought they were asking
well,
the
questions. Well, I know,
questions.
but you gave such a...
Not to deflect.
Get me out of this hole, Ernie. Come on.
Well, look, first of all, geological, in the long term, geological isolation of nuclear waste remains the right pathway. There's been nothing to suggest scientifically it's inadequate at all. However, one does need to take care, and I won't go into this in detail, and just to annoy some people, I'm sure. But for example, in the United States, we decided on a project in Nevada, Yucca Mountain, some years back, and many say that the failure of that project is purely political. That is incorrect. It is also scientifically inadequate. So let's just be very, very clear. That project was ill-chosen in terms of its location. But geological isolation in proper geochemical environments should be absolutely fine. Now, like the Scandinavians, the Swedes, the Finns, now on the way to that, there's no rush. Isabelle mentioned so-called interim storage. I'm not sure I like the word interim, but that is what it's called. And it is. So there's every indication that we can continue to store irradiated fuel perfectly safely in what are called dry casks, 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. And what we should be doing, and what we always should have been doing, but Congress made some unfortunate choices in the 1980s. What we should have been doing is exactly that: interim storage, preferably consolidated in a few places in the United States, get it away from the reactors, not for safety reasons per se, but because it just doesn't fit the business model of a utility to maintain this stuff on site. Consolidate it, leave it there for many, many decades, keep working on geological isolation, and when the right time comes, you make the choice. What do you do with that irradiated fuel? How do you dispose of it, et cetera? It only becomes easier with time, and what we're doing is completely illogical.
Okay, one final question. We rehearsed this in the back. President Trump just announced his intention to appoint Chris Wright, who's an oil and gas executive, but also a friend of nuclear, to the Department of Defense to be Secretary of Defense. And so, energy. Energy. Thank you. So that's
He's
what we're
not on
talking about
Fox
today,
News.
Energy. So they told me they wanted me to flip a coin to see who would answer first about giving him some advice as he takes that post. So I've got heads here and tails here. Who's going to call it?
I will. Isabelle. Oh yeah, let Isabelle call it.
Oh, you're calling.
Oh, you call it. You just flip it. I'll call it. You get it over. Tails.
It's tails.
Okay, you go first.
Okay. Okay, Rick, what do you think about this question?
Have at it.
All right. Well, look. To be specific in terms of the announced nominee for DOE, look. First of all, he comes from that Texas A&M of the Northeast. He did went to school at MIT. He has experience, obviously, in the oil and gas sector. He was kind of a pioneer in hydraulic fracturing. He also has experience in solar, and as was said, he's on the board of Oklo. He's got, I think, a real interest in nuclear energy. So I think he does have some pretty broad interests in energy. I'm going to mention what I consider to be two major challenges. But first, I would have to say that he also, I would say, he's not, from what I've heard him say, he is not a climate denier, but he's a climate action denier, in the sense that he does not think it's worth, it's ideal to spend resources, et cetera, there. He focuses instead on other environmental challenges where he feels more agency, such as clean cooking in large parts of the world, which I admire very much. But on the climate action, I certainly don't agree with him. First of all, I will say categorically, we are heading to a much lower carbon economy. I cannot predict the pace or scale of that, but that is certainly, in my view, one of the many reasons for advocating for the nuclear power expansion. We're heading there. And the private sector knows that, and the private sector has been very, very consistent in moving in that direction and in committing long-term capital along with that assumption. Now, in terms of the action, we all understand that the climate change, global warming, it's called global warming for a reason. It's a global issue, and it requires a global solution. But that doesn't change the fact that the United States and China are the lead emitters, lead economies, many ways lead innovators, and that we can, as Rick said in a different context, lead the world by doing that, and in fact position ourselves very well for what will be a low carbon world eventually, although with differentiated pace to get there depending upon economic development. Now, to end my comments before Rick's, I will mention two areas where I think the nominee, Chris Wright, may have some challenges. One is, in contrast to my companion here, for example, in going to the Department of Energy, and frankly, I had been in government before becoming secretary as well, those who take these jobs thinking that government processes don't matter and can be brushed aside don't do very well. So I hope that there's some fast learning here in terms of how to actually run a public organization as opposed to a private organization. A lot of CEOs have not done well in government, to be perfectly honest. It's just a fact, okay? Secondly, and we only alluded to it slightly in one question that Isabelle asked, most people don't realize that the Department of Energy's budget is like 70% national security. It's responsible for nuclear weapons. It's responsible for nuclear nonproliferation. It's responsible for nuclear propulsion of our Navy, et cetera. And I think from everything I understand, I think Chris will need a lot of help in being able to manage that. And it's not only, by the way, today's requirements, and those requirements are huge. I hate to go into it, but you may know that the United States is engaging in a somewhat controversial, growing towards $2 trillion modernization of the entire nuclear weapons system. DOE's in the middle of that. It's not going well, bluntly. Frankly, it's going very poorly in terms of cost escalation and schedule escalation, et cetera. And in addition to that forward-looking stuff, the department is also responsible for cleaning up the Cold War radioactive mess. That's not going well. And so there are going to be a lot of responsibilities that may not be bargained for entirely here.
Going in and thinking that you're going to, well, let me give you this example. Somebody asked him what was it like being on the cabinet. And now I think what they were asking me was, what's it like to work for Trump? Which is a whole nother story. But
You've got time.
But the what I like to relate to him was, I said, and this is on anybody's cabinet. It was on Reagan's cabinet. It was on Bush's cabinet. It was on Obama's cabinet. It was on anybody's cabinet in modern time. In the world that we live in today, you're an ant on a log, in a river, during a raging flood, with a stick in your hand, and you think you're actually guiding that log to a destination. That's the reality of being. If you think you're going to change this big monolithic government by coming in and, having edicts, good luck. So my advice to the new secretary nominee or designee is, enjoy this. It's the most fascinating job I ever had in my life. Not the best job I ever had. Being the CEO of the state of Texas is the best job. But being the Secretary of Energy is the most fascinating job I ever had in my life because of the people you get to work with. I want to say like 38% of them are veterans because of the military side of this, the nuclear weapons, et cetera, the national security side of it. Being able to work with 17 national labs that are literally the crown jewels of the world, doing the most fascinating work that you can imagine. And go visit those labs. That would be my advice to him. Go visit those labs, Mr. Secretary. Go make friends with the directors of those labs. Go work with them. Go be a partner with them. Go, I think I increased the budget by 75% while I was there for the national labs because of the work we were doing on quantum computing, the work that we were doing on the revitalization of our nuclear weapons program. Go find those places where you can really make a difference. But if you think you're going to come in and blow the place up and restructure it in a 4-year period of time, you're probably going to be disappointed. But you can make a lot of difference. Ernie did while he was secretary. I think we affected the agency in a good way. We went from, I think we had, we were like number 3 and number 7 in our supercomputing capability. And when I left, we were number 1, and we were number 3, and we were number 5. And that's the type of precise difference that you can make with the right mindset, working with Congress and having a relationship with them. Go find your champions, your angels in Congress, and work closely with them. And so my advice is to Mr. Wright, who I don't know him in a personal way, but go enjoy this extraordinary agency and go help make this country a better place by empowering your staff that you're going to bring in, and this would be my last piece of advice. Get yourself an S2 that actually knows the agency.
Secretary Perry, Secretary Moniz, thank you all very much for being here and for your leadership.